Hello there, and welcome to the Philosophy Podcast, hosted by your one and only, murdered for being too ugly, too annoying, and overall a nuisance, Socrates, joined by my friends.
I'm Charles Darwin, a well-traveled scientist, thinker, writer, basically an all-around scholar, and I have developed the education system and revolutionized it as the world knows it.
And I'm Marcus Aurelius. I'm sure I don't need much of an introduction because you've probably heard all about my adventures around the Roman Empire. You know, I was a really big and successful emperor back in the day. Someone could consider me a philosopher. I myself wouldn't. But yeah, we're very excited to speak.
Certainly, we've come back from the dead for today to provide an enlightening podcast episode, a little discussion on the topic of human nature and, the overall topic of human nature and adjacent subjects. So let's kick it right off. I'm just going to put something on the floor and, just shout at whatever you guys want. Question 1. We have some prompts, by the way, so that's why we have our computers out. This took us a while to get used to, but hey.
Yeah, this new world technology.
Yeah, whatever. Do you believe humans are born with innate instincts? Anyone could start.
I think that this is something that I have witnessed very obviously in my travels. I have explored like every region of the world, from Antarctica to, Siberia. And I've noticed many different behaviors among the animals and people all across the world. And I've noticed many different, many similar rather, instincts among them all. Animals, just like human beings, have instincts. And this is displayed through our innate fears of predators as we go out and our fellow man as well. We notice very apparently that we have paranoia of getting conquered or one-upped in the workplace, or this is an instinct that is built in us, as well as our attraction to find a mate or our desire for friendship. This is something that is seen both in human beings and in animals. Animals are often seen in groups. A lot of them desire that sort of connection, and human beings are built that same way instinctually, I truly believe. And also the feeling of compassion is something that I believe is built into us because you can be born, even regardless of the environment you're born. I believe that the idea of being a hateful person is something that is learned through some sort of upbringing that has shaped that worldview. It is not something that we are innately born with, but I do believe we do have instincts that we have from birth due to our genetic makeup.
So you talked about compassion a little bit. I have a question, which is, what do you mean by that? I personally believe that humans have essentially an unending compassion towards themselves. Humans, in my opinion, are unable to do anything which they perceive will actively harm them. However, can you speak on your experience of compassion towards others? I mean, what basis do you have to say what basis or grounds do you have to say that compassion is an instinct rather than just a learned societal behavior?
Well, I think compassion can be amplified through teaching from our parents, because it is very, the main counter argument to the ideas that human beings have instincts would be that everything is taught, as someone like Sartre would say. But I think that as seen in nature, the fact that it's displayed in nature is what I would say is evidence that is also innate in us, because animals that don't have these social pressures to act compassionate to others as we do, because we've developed more as civilized beings, they are more, the fact that they still display compassion, I think that is a great example that we also innately have compassion.
Okay.
So my view on, an instinct is something much more fundamental. And you were talking about how compassion can be amplified through teachings or unlearned. And in my mind, if you have an instinct, you can't really unlearn it. And so I'm of the belief that humans only really have two instincts, and those are self-preservation, which is going to encapsulate, eating, breathing, sleeping, mating, one-upping competition, and social instincts, which are going to have to do with the fact that humans are social animals, and so you want to interact with others. And I think saying that passion or compassion is like an instinct because you can observe it in animals is a bit of a stretch, because like self-preservation, I think is very obvious to say is an instinct because it's fundamental. Everyone has it. You cannot unlearn it or learn it. Like, no matter how different your culture is, people are always going to look for self-preservation, right? Whereas there are definitely cultures where compassion is not really as present. And so I think the fact that it can be, like, it is so malleable kind of removes it from being an instinct, even though maybe it's a trait that is common, very common, and can be exhibited in other animals. I think instinct is kind of pushing it.
I mean, I would agree that it is much more malleable than some other human instincts, like, for example, the instinct to mate. But I believe that malleability is completely due to social factors, as you were saying, and as it varies in environments, that doesn't change the fact that we do have, it's just a matter of how much we can repress this instinct. Just how, I mean, some people go their whole life without finding a mate or don't want a mate, but I do believe that is an instinct that is repressed by us. So that does that change the fact that it is truly an instinct within us? That's how I view it.
During my life, I didn't think that much about instincts or talk about it. However, there's one thing that I briefly mentioned, which is that I believe all humans have a tendency to be unable to do an action that they truly believe will harm them. What do I mean by this? So, for example, you might do something with the intention that will harm themselves or their well-being. So, for example, there's a distinct split between what you see fit and what you actually do. What do I mean by this? For example, you might see, let's say you don't want Mr. Aurelius to be on his computer anymore. Maybe you could see a few things that are fit. You never do what you want. You can only do what you see fit. You might think Mr. Aurelius should not be on his computer anymore. So that's what you want, but you can't ever you can't do that. You can do things that might lead you to that goal. So I believe humans have a tendency to want to do things that are only beneficial, that they believe are only beneficial to themselves. And they are always pursuing what they see fit will lead to that end outcome. And that's the closest I've ever thought of to instincts, not necessarily, there's this disconnect. So if you want to get him off his computer, what you see fit might be shutting his computer, but that might not get him off his computer. Maybe that leads to a different outcome. So that's my opinion on innate instincts, is that we have that one for self-preservation, and past that, things like compassion aren't really instincts. They're more ways of doing things which are best, which we see fit is best for us.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a little bit selfish, but not necessarily.
I mean, that kind of ties to my idea of natural selection, that,
yeah.
Self-preservation is necessary to, continue your bloodline. And I think we all, while we may have some discrepancy in our lines may be drawn in different areas, we still borderline believe in the prompt that we all would agree that whether or not some things you would deem instincts, human beings are born with certain amounts of instincts to them.
Some behaviors which cannot be learned and which are naturally there. For example, eating or drinking water, perhaps.
Yeah, I do think your point too about how some people don't want to mate or don't want to have kids, and so you can't really say that's an instinct on the point of compassion. And you're saying, like, because compassion is malleable, like, you can't say it's not an instinct just because it's malleable, because, like, other instincts are malleable as well. I think you could also even tie that into self-preservation. Like, some people end up committing suicide, some people fast, some people like starve themselves fast. And so I don't think you can really prove the exception to be the rule in that case. And I think that it's really the degree of malleability which is determining whether or not this thing is an instinct, because compassion is just, like, so incredibly malleable, whereas the other ones are present in, like, a much higher percentage of the population. And that's why I'm kind of against lumping that in with all the other instincts, if that makes sense.
Yes, but at the same time, you can see animals in the animal kingdom, like, for example, as I was brought to the future today, I was on this app called TikTok, and I saw a video of this man that recently he had 2 dogs, but one of them passed away, and one of them was very depressed, and that dog was starving itself as well. Just as a human may make the choice to, and obviously no one would, or I haven't met anybody that would argue that dogs aren't born with natural instincts to eat. Like, they obviously don't know when to stop eating. They will eat anytime there's something in front of them. But the fact, like, they even, if somebody is so emotionally driven by some sort of social factor, like loss of a loved one, or obviously like suicide would be an example, instincts can be overridden, but again, that's just kind of a discrepancy in where we decide to draw our lines.
Yeah, I guess it is. Yeah.
Yes, I agree.
Would you guys like to move on to the next question?
I would love
Sure,
to.
I would,
Okay.
yeah. I wish I had more to add on that, but fortunately I didn't think that much about instincts, only about human condition,
Mm-hmm.
But yeah.
So here's a bit more of a hard pill to swallow, I imagine. How would you define a people as civilized?
I would like to kick that one off. Kind of building on the point of instincts. Obviously, like when people first started out and when you're first born, you have all these like instincts. And I think what makes a person or a group of people civilized is to learn to replace these instincts with wisdom and reason. A big part of Stoicism, is going with the logos of the universe, working hard to do your best to basically fulfill your role. And I think that logic and reason are very integral to that. And that if you're only going off of your instincts and only going off of your like survival necessities, then that's not, you're not really going with the logos. If you have your chariot that's dragging you in the theoretical Stoic way where the chariot is logos, then I think you are getting dragged by the chariot and you are not running with it. And so, I think a civilized group of people is just one that is very aware of what they should be doing, what is best for them to do, thinks about things critically, and imparts a lot of wisdom.
Yes, my friend. Well, I can see that you take after Socratic wisdom in the Stoic school, because although what you're saying about the logos kind of went over my head, it's very similar. I believe I have a famous quote I think I've said one time. The only quote-unquote bad life is an unexamined one. The only unfulfilled life is an unexamined life, unreflected life. So I feel like what separates civilized people and uncivilized people is that of reflection and contemplation on your past life. Or not past life, just your past and what's happening in your life, and using that to develop your morals. I believe that the only virtue is that of wisdom. And so part of wisdom and part of learning or knowledge is reflection. And so I believe that is what defines civilized peoples. And in that ties in things like education and job specificity and things like developing a craft or developing a knack, which can be extrapolated further, but yeah.
That's an interesting idea to me. Like, obviously, I think one ground we all agree on would be the job specificity is a major drawing line of civilization. But the idea of reflection is something that I had never really considered in terms of civilized. Like, are you suggesting that those that are less civilized or not civilized, they don't reflect on their past or their... I guess, could you just go more into detail about that? Like, they're like... what you mean by reflection, because obviously they have stories to tell still, but
Yes. So reflecting and remembering the past are very different things. I can have cooked dinner, and tonight I can say I remember this, or I can cook dinner and I can reflect on it. I can reflect on my faults. I can reflect on what I would like to do better, and I could improve. And I also could reflect on what's going on right now in a few hours and think about how I wish I would have said something differently. You must examine your own life and put your own life under a looking glass, a microscope, in order to live a fulfilling life, a civilized life, if you may. If you go through your life without thinking of what you're doing or without thinking about where you stand on your issues, for example, I once had this friend, Gorgias, who was an orator, and although he may have examined his life, he did many unethical things and he didn't think about what he was doing. Perhaps he didn't examine his life enough. He's certainly civilized, but the difference between an orator who talks out of their ass, if I may, and simply exists to persuade people their points and does not desire some sort of knowledge, versus a savage is the fact that an orator reflects on what they're doing. An orator can look at their life and go, that's interesting, and use that as grounds for further development.
Okay. That's interesting. There's not a criteria that I had necessarily applied to my definition, but it is, I don't necessarily disagree with that. I think that is something I might have to consider.
I think, I think that weaves in pretty well with what I believe as well. A big part of acting in virtue and with reason has to do with reflection, and you learn from your past and the things that you've done, and you use those lessons to act with more reason and virtue in the future. So I think that checks out.
And just to elaborate, what I am talking about when I say improving virtue is improving wisdom, kind of reflecting, acknowledging where you are ignorant. And that I believe that all virtue comes from wisdom. And that I guess the worst thing someone can be is ignorant and not reflecting or knowing of it. It's okay if you're ignorant, but it's not okay if you're ignorant and you're okay with it, if you know what I mean. You must be ignorant, but also be willing to go further and figure out things you don't know and discover kind of endlessly. And I guess that perfectly ties into a future question that we will talk, saying, should people get educated and how so? I believe that this is of the utmost importance, but I think that the main contention, and I hope that I'm not being disagreed with here, but I think the main contention is, what do we consider education? Like, how should someone get educated? How should they further their knowledge?
In my experience, I think my education was phenomenal. I interacted with a lot of different philosophers. I learned the way of the world, learned many different schools of thought. And I think that was, for me, very, very productive in allowing me to look at the world in many different ways. And it granted me a lot of wisdom, which allows me to act with more virtue in the future. I think education is extremely important because, again, it allows you to act with more virtue and wisdom in the future, and be as close to the natural order of the universe as possible. And it also, teaches you self-discipline, critical thinking, which are also very important for all of that. So yeah, I think education is extremely important, and that the best way to do it is talking with people wiser than you and learning about philosophy.
Yes.
I agree. I mean, education has greatly impacted me, obviously, and I feel like there's a great deal to be learned through just schooling in general. It may not be, you can't expect that everyone should be educated. That's not necessarily a necessity for society, but I do believe that people that like to defy my teachings should at least have a little education to their belt before they start speaking up. But I think education in the classroom is important, but also I believe firsthand experience and going out to witness things through travel and other means are a way of educating that should not be ignored, because you're always hearing through a different scope when you're getting educated through some teacher that heard it through that just read it somewhere, and you're hearing their interpretation of whatever they read. Whereas if you go out and truly experience this whether you're learning about like you're going to witness nature behaviors or you're going to see a historic site, that will be through your lens and you will be able to make your own deduction based on that. But you should not go out there with you should take every presumption you get through education with a grain of salt, because you don't know what biases your educator has.
Yes. I feel like both of you took a little bit from me. I would agree with that. As I've previously said, knowledge is the utmost virtue. And with that, education is held very highly to me. I think that skepticism is wonderful. I think you should question what's going on in the world and continue to, as part of the self-reflection, reflect and question, continue to propose questions. You guys may have heard of my style of teaching. I heard it's become popular today. It's called Socratic thinking, or many people in middle schools and high schools call Socratic seminars. This is essentially what we're doing now, a seminar of asking each other questions and leading. I believe that we should all work together to question each other and challenge each other on our thoughts, not to undermine each other, but to further help reinforce what we think. I think that we're all on a similar page here. However, I think that we all should question each other and educate through reflection and thinking and gaining knowledge from the natural world, of course, but also once you gain this knowledge, be skeptical about it. Think about the implications of what's happening. Think about what's going on. I mean, like I said, challenge each other with your questions, and use these challenging questions as ways to progress our own intelligence and progress the amount of knowledge that each of us has. And in that form, education is extremely important and extremely valuable. I mean, my student Plato started the academy, and I hope to think he stuck true to most, if not all, of my teachings, and that stood to be one of, if not the biggest schools in Western Europe for many, many years. So I think you guys should know I'm a big education man. Go to college, kids.
I mean, it's not something I have explored very much or written very much about, but it is something obviously that I've benefited greatly from. And I will say though that it is not it should be there for people that want to grow, but it is not necessarily a necessity for those who want to live an efficient lifestyle. I mean, if you are able to work hard with your hands, or you are honed in a specific craft and you have no desire to grow your mind and learn the inner workings of the world, you can still live a completely fulfilling life and find a partner and instill good morals onto your children, as long as you have an open mind and are willing to let them take whichever path they want to take.
But answer me this, is you said working with your hands and becoming a craftsman. Are these not also forms of education? Are these not forms of knowledge and learning? I mean, in that sense, I think everything you said is saying that people should and do get educated. You said that if people go and they work with their hands or they do other tasks, that I believe is also that's also education. I believe part of it is reflecting and questioning what you're doing and having an understanding of it. You don't have to be an astrophysicist or a mathematician to be educated. You can be any person on the planet, as long as you are gaining some sort of knowledge and kind of questioning what the world is doing around you, even if what your world is working with wood or farming. Those can be forms of getting educated too.
I would say I agree with everything you said, besides the questioning the world aspect, because usually when you're working in a specific craft, you usually just become really good at whatever the way you were taught to do it. You may change certain methods, but you aren't pensive and actively trying to grow your mind. You're just trying to hone that specific craft. And I think that really goes against the whole idea of trying to get the most broad perspective and constantly trying to build off from a new school of thought, I suppose.
Yeah, I think having craftsmen is obviously very important, and it's very important for people to learn how to do that, but I wouldn't consider it an actual education just because you are not applying reason and critical thinking a lot of the times for these. By definition, when these fields have, apprenticeship models, you're just doing what the older guy says to do, and then you pass that on to the guy younger than you. And just by the nature of it, you're not doing much critical thinking yourself. And so I wouldn't consider that an education. I think it's very important for those people to also read books very intently. I think it's important for those types of people to also get an outside higher education if they're able to, just because, again, I think that will allow them to just reason through life and have like much more better critical thinking abilities, which can allow them to in turn live in very close harmony with nature and be much more virtuous.
I see, but the one thing that you said there was critical thinking, correct, and reason. But those working on a farm and working through the crops and farming and getting this knowledge does not mean that you're not critically thinking and reasoning about this. And I think that you very much should and can do that. And that could also be grounds for saying that this person is educated. Of course, that varies in what we want to consider education is. Is education a depth of philosophical and literary, like being an encyclopedia for literature and philosophy, or is it simply having, I think that being educated is someone who can reason and critically think and is skeptical and questions the world around them. The only good life is the examined life. People who examine their lives and use that for reason and critical thinking, I think, are educated. And I think this just boils down to what you guys consider education is. But from my standpoint, I would consider these farmers, these craftsmen, as educated, well educated.
When you're learning to be a farmer and you're learning about everything your dad or whoever is teaching you, then it's not necessarily like you cannot possibly think critically about it, but it's doing very little to prompt or foster that critical thinking. And I could say that my education is walking down the street for an hour a day and critically thinking about the things I see. And while that could be a way to develop critical reasoning and it could allow me to actually become educated in your sense of the word, I don't think it's the type of activity that we can just have people do during their lives and then consider them educated as a result, just because it's not actively forcing that critical thinking. You can do it, but it's not really, it's kind of like a byproduct or like something that you're doing while also doing that activity. It's not your main focus. And so because of that, I don't think that we should force people to walk an hour down the street and call that an education when they're young. And I think it's much better for the main focus of the activity to be the education and to be the critical reasoning and learning. And that is why I don't really see farming and crafts to kind of fall into that category.
When you walk down the street and you critically think, do you think and reflect and perhaps realize that you don't know certain things? Perhaps you walk down the street and you say, I don't know how that works, I don't know what that is. You do that when you're farming. Perhaps you're learning farming and you say, I'm thinking about this, I have no clue what this is or the purpose of this. This is what it's called to be ignorant. I think no one knows anything. I think the only thing I know is that I know nothing. But I also think that it is incorrect to say that you could just live your life without being cognizant and working towards not being ignorant in the things that you're ignorant in. And I think that is what is the essence of it. I mean, you can attempt to force, as you said, critical thinking or prompt critical thinking all you want, but there's no actual guarantee, there's no way for someone to always like to be like, oh, this person is actually critically thinking. I think it's a much more internal process that the person who is undergoing the education must acknowledge, hey, I am ignorant in this, let me go and let me figure this out, or I'm ignorant in XYZ. This understanding, accepting, and learning more about your own ignorance is what I believe truly is what defines an education. However, I do think, because as you said, of course, you have to be very wealthy to educate. I mean, in my time as well, you have to be very wealthy, but I think that a financial or class barrier should not be the barrier to education and philosophy, and wisdom should be open to all, not just those who can afford to learn to read and get books and be placed with tutors who can, as you say, force them to. So,
well, I don't know, because a lot of people, I mean, if you truly have an inspiration to go and pursue that education, I do think there should be avenues to go there, but at the same time, you know, we can't have a society where everybody wants to become Socrates, you know. We need some people that are willing to hone themselves in a specific craft. And I think the class gateway is sort of in itself a barrier of civilization and Darwinism, dare I say, that keeps society and civilization in a productive and functional place. Because if everyone had access to a bunch of education, everybody would believe that they are above working these craftsman jobs that we absolutely need to function. And that's just the way it has to be. Some people need to have access to education, and some people should educate themselves. I would say it's still education, but they should educate themselves in a certain
you remind me of a much kinder version and much less crass version of a man I once talked to named Callicles, who considered my philosophy and my thinking and these types of discussion to be very childlike and very silly and useless in a way, and not providing any form of education, and B, not being productive at all. And my response to him is that, yes, I believe that all children should have this type of discussions, fundamental quote unquote education, and they should also be able to do other things. They aren't mutually exclusive. As I've been saying this whole time, I think that the simple act of becoming and examining your life and critically thinking about your own life as a farmer is just, of course, you aren't going to have the same wealth of books read or math problems solved, or so be it, as the king of the Roman Empire or a biologist, but you will still have the same ability to reason and critically think, and things which I consider to be essential towards being called educated and having a fulfilling life. So,
I think to say that on average, at least, the farmer will come out with the same ability to reason and think critically as a well-educated emperor as myself, or not a marine biologist, but a biologist, is quite a stretch. And again, I'm not saying that it's not impossible for a farmer to be put in situations where they will think critically and where they will become, very much educated and have those abilities. But when you're in that environment where you're actively being educated and you're being posed with these problems and questions that are, they're making you, I guess not even forcing you, but making you much more likely to have to think critically, then 9 times out of 10, the person who's facing those problems regularly is going to come out and be a much better critical thinker at the end of the day.
You are correct. However, answer me this. You grew up in a way almost predestined to become the emperor, yes?
No, I was most likely going to be in the Senate, but
you were still going to be a noble. You were not.
You're going to be educated.
You were going to be educated, regardless of what position you had in life. It would have been one where you were thoroughly educated. Think of the millions of people who live in Rome. There are millions of people who are unable to have an education. And so to define an education as only something that the top 1% can have is a little bit silly, don't you think? I think education, if we all value education as such a moral, central moral concept, then shouldn't it be available to more people? Or is it only available to the select few to have an education? I mean, one of your colleagues, Epictetus, was a slave, had no education to begin with. However, I would call him educated. As a slave, you don't usually get all the books and guidance that a current emperor or even senator in Rome, such as yourself, would get. But he has written many philosophical texts which I think have influenced you and other philosophers. I think perhaps even Mr. Darwin over here. And you have come from perhaps not a super wealthy family. You come about 2,000 years after me. And yeah, you come about I'm 2,000 years older than you, and let me tell you that things have changed. A lot of things have changed.
I know.
And in your time, someone who in my time may have been predestined to be a farmer might be able to become something more. However, still, a top-notch education, an education which would be considered civilized, which I think would call everyone to be civilized, and which would allow everyone to lead a moral life, or not a moral, but to lead a virtuous life, because again, I believe knowledge and wisdom is virtue, is something that almost everyone, if not everyone, can achieve. I mean, of course, there are exceptions, or the exceptions are not the majority. And I think that you guys are both the exceptions in your time periods, not the majorities. And I don't think that your standards of education shall be measured towards the general public and saying that they are educated and saying that I think that we're focusing a little bit much on education for human nature topics. So
That's
you
true.
guys want to...
It was an interesting kind of rabbit hole though, but you are right that we are kind of focused in on, we are honed in on something that is very limited to the top 1%, but let's move on to this idea, which is not something I've discussed very much, but it's something that I do have quite a bit to say on, I would say. Do you believe that art or music has an impact on the condition/morality, and on the human condition/morality? And if so, how does it?
I feel like I've been talking quite a lot, so I'll let you guys go, but yeah.
I haven't done too much exploring on art, on the impact of the human condition. I would imagine that, it encourages reflection, fosters tranquility, which is going to, again, help you work closer with the logos. And it also helps to communicate and discover truths about human nature and human experience. And so I think it's definitely an overall positive on the human condition and morality if it's enabling people to live in a better and more virtuous way. But I haven't done too much exploring on that.
My question is, do you believe art and music to be part of the logos? Or how would you say that art and music lies in logos and living in accordance with nature?
And I think by definition, they are part of the logos. I think a big part of that has to do with the fact that they're created by humans. Me personally, I think that, when people are creating art or creating music, that a lot of that is the logos kind of speaking through that person. They are bringing the universe onto the page.
So
there's much else to say there.
In essence, the natural world and the, world of art and music are not mutually exclusive, but in fact one, is what you're saying, correct?
Yeah.
That's an interesting point.
Because the natural world is, again, very much intertwined with humans, and obviously art and music are a higher form and a very civilized form of human expression, and I think to be able to do that, you need to be quite wise. You need to be quite virtuous to be able to communicate in that way. And so I think that, when you're behaving in a wise and virtuous manner, that you are behaving in accordance with the logos. And as a result, I think that art and music are very, very much intertwined with logos.
I would say, I do agree that art and music are something that you do need. There's a high barrier of entry in terms of intellect when you need to pursue such crafts, but I do not believe that they are necessarily have a great impact on the human condition or nature. Especially music, I believe music is primarily, or at least its origins can be drawn back to human instinct and basic human nature. That they are simply, the origins were a means of courtship. The female voice is naturally more pretty, and just as any like animal mating ritual, like a male peacock with beautiful feathers, or like a male firefly doing a specific pattern to attract a female firefly, I believe that the female singing voice is just a means of attracting males through an enchanting sort of sound, and we are just wired to be enamored by that. And art is sort of in a similar light, like it's sort of exemplifies like these sort of beautiful landscapes, and sometimes harsh, but it's just a means of expressing emotions. And I don't think they really, if you ask me, I think it's kind of a waste of human intellect and productivity.
To do art and make music is a waste.
In general.
Yeah.
So if you're saying that a lot of the reason that we enjoy music has to do with the fact that the female voice would enamor men.
That was a specific example, but
Then if a person, so say I enjoy music from a man, or I enjoy music with no voice at all, what do you make of that?
Well, I mean, that's just like, again, like if you see someone that has very talented piano skills, like it's just an example of their intellect. Like the female voice was just an example, but it ties back to my idea on just the expression. Like the fact that they have been able to hone a craft so thoroughly is just a way for them to flaunt. Even if now the meaning has been kind of skewed, initially in human development, I believe that it was just a means of courtship and displaying your emotions in a way that is less organic than directly communicating them or trying to process them through discussion like this.
So if I am enjoying music from a man, does that mean that I'm being courted by him and that I'm attracted to him necessarily?
Not necessarily attraction, but you are maybe feeling some sort of like impression by him, or just maybe you feel jealousy towards him. I don't know, but it's a display of intellectual dominance, is what I would argue.
Mm-hmm. So, take for example, I haven't been here in this new world for too long, but one artist I've heard of is Kanye West.
Okay.
And a lot of what you're saying is that if you're listening to music by a man, a lot of it has to do with the fact that you listen to that and very much appreciate that man as a person, right? But I think a big thing I've heard with Kanye West is that people say they enjoy his music, but they don't enjoy him as a person or his message. And so that kind of directly contradicts, and he's one of the biggest artists in the world right now. So what do you make of that?
Well, obviously, that man has gone crazy. I've heard of him too in my short time here, but
He's interesting fellow.
It definitely, he's made the headlines. So
Yeah.
you can't miss him, but again, like I said, like societal constructs have construed the message, but I do believe at the end of the day that, this man is full of arrogance, dominance. He thinks he's the king. In fact, on his new album, the last song was called The King. He's still the king. But even if it's not necessarily a means of courtship and what he says does not reflect it, you can't deny the fact that the music that he has produced over time is something that is a direct reflection of his talents in that field.
Interesting. I feel as though I have done a little bit of research on both of your guys' readings and texts before our discussion, and I've also heard of this Kanye fellow. Would you believe? I guess this might be a loaded question, a little bit guiding, but would you believe that music has? I want to go back a little bit to something you were saying earlier about survival instincts. Music currently we have what are called harmonies, and music sounds good. And I want to go back a little bit to the instrumental music. And I can see what you mean about human voice. I can see what you mean about understanding and appreciating other people playing instruments. However, what about something like, I guess this is a bad example of what we're listening to at the moment, because this is someone's speaking, but perhaps something like this, which is all instrumental, and we're simply listening to it. We're not acknowledging and seeing this sort of intellect, but we're more perceiving it through an alternative medium. Do you think that there is something more natural about evolving that we perceive music sounding good, or is it mainly survival instincts?
I mean, the general taste of the public is that music is constantly... Well, I mean, our taste, as more time progresses, as humanity evolves further, our desires and changes in music taste shift more rapidly. And I think social factors play a major part in that. But even the fact that there's no vocals and we can't see what's going on, we still know the effort that has to go into this. Obviously, jazz is a perfect example because it's one of the most technically impressive genres of music. And
but is that really what you think people are considering and admiring when they hear a piece like this? Is just the technical ability and how difficult it must be?
Yes, that's what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I mean, even if most people don't acknowledge that, I think when it boils down to it, that is what our nature is drawn to, even if a lot of people aren't analyzing it that deeply.
So,
but for us intellects, we can acknowledge that.
What about songs that are then extremely simple to play, but more enjoyable to people than songs that are extremely technically difficult?
Yes, that is something that...
How do you explain that?
Well, even if it's less technically challenging, it's still being able to identify what the public wants and being able to play something that catches on. I feel like there's a pretty good argument that is, in its own way, an impressive skill.
But when I'm listening to the song and say it's in a vacuum and nobody's heard this song but me, and nobody's ever going to hear it but me, I can still appreciate that song and enjoy it, even though it's simple, and I'm not saying, I think the public's going to love this, right?
Well, societal factors have led you to having your own specific taste towards music, and I feel like, I mean, unless you're saying this is the first song you've ever heard in your life, but even, the fact that you like it is probably derived based on past experiences, and that this is something new, but it also aligns with things I like, and therefore I like it. Or this is surprising. There's all kinds of reasons, but I do believe it is derived by a basic instinct of being impressed by the dominance of a certain person in this field of art. But overall, it's a waste of time.
It's a waste of time. I believe that music and art are very reflective things. Again, in my short period here, I've taken a liking to jazz, and as anyone who happens to stumble upon this recording has heard, there's been jazz playing in the background softly. And I believe that, and from my experience, music is a very, in a way, music, in my opinion, done correctly, and art done correctly, is a very introspective approach towards art and gaining knowledge. And I feel it is no different as walking and reflecting on your life and critically thinking about ways to improve on what you're ignorant about. It's no different whether that is in music and art or in philosophy. I think these are all essentially serve the same purpose. And I think that wisdom, this is simply another type of education, knowledge and wisdom to be virtuous in. I know, I talked a lot about, I'm like a broken record, but I think music and art is another area that if you invest your time into, can help develop you and grow your knowledge in other areas, not just philosophy. And so I don't think it's a waste of time at all. I think if anything, I think if it was done in isolation, if anything any task was done in isolation without the accompaniment of introspection, it's a useless task. A colleague of mine a contemporary that I never met in my life, but in the afterlife I got to talk to him for quite a bit, named the Buddha, had many similar approaches and beliefs to that, where any mundane task, regardless of how trivial it may seem, if done with intentionality, focus, and introspection, can be just as important as a world-saving action.
Okay. Well, I don't know. I mean, maybe, yeah, I would agree that through avenues of music that are still objectively intellectually challenging, you can still grow more intelligent. But I believe that avenues such as just exploring the sciences would be a more efficient way to do that, or exploring a craft, anything that can, for lack of a better term, get you laid, and get you to become a wiser, better man, more efficient man. While music may still be a good avenue for that, I feel like it's not the ideal, and therefore I think it is a waste of time.
Do you think that wastes of time, what you would consider a waste of time, can help contribute to living a good life, or no? Because
I think it's a good segue to
that
question
was,
8.
That was my goal. Just really quick, because I want to be mindful. How long has our podcast been running? I don't think that
51 minutes, but
okay.
Why do you say we hit an hour?
I don't think that my that our time here can be more than an hour long. I think we're going to be called back down to the pits of hell. So.
Oh yeah, we might be.
Yeah, so.
I can feel the hands of Satan
I can
pulling
feel
at my
Satan
ankle,
tickling my feet already.
Okay, so are we doing one more, or are we gonna call it, guys?
Let's do question 8 and call it.
Yeah,
I wanted to do question 8.
We didn't do any of yours, so I wanted to.
Thank you. So, this is something I've been wondering, guys, what you think about, because I know the answer. But is happiness the ultimate goal of life? And if so, how can it be achieved?
Yes, I think I would use a slightly different phrasing. I would use the same phrasing that you would use, which was eudaimonia, which is for us Grecians, essentially human flourishing, and the only good way to describe it in English might be happiness. But yes, I believe humans, we naturally tend towards this, and I think that a good life is not only one that I keep continuously saying are examined, but I think humans have this tendency to go towards what benefits them. Like I said previously, humans cannot do anything which they believe will harm them, or like they believe that will harm them. For example, I will not stab my arm unless if I believe that there is something good that will come out of that. Perhaps that might be in the future. However, I will not willingly do something that I fully believe has absolutely no upsides for me in any shape or form. And I believe that is because humans have this tendency towards eudaimonia, towards happiness. And that is what living a good life is. So yes, and I believe that, for example, why do you take medication? Do you swallow a pill for the sake of swallowing a pill, or do you swallow a pill to go somewhere else? I believe all the tasks in our life are simply these intermediary tasks, and are both intermediary tasks and end goals in themselves. In that, me doing this with my computer is an intermediary task to prove a point. And that was the intermediary task was to prove the point, and that point was both the end goal and the intermediary task. And proving this point is both an intermediary task and an end goal for another task. And I believe that this chain kind of goes on until we've reached, or not, I don't think we ever reach, but get close to a state of eudaimonia and happiness. And I think that is, the main goal. And that's what I was talking about when I said what people see fit to do versus what they want to do. I think these intermediate tasks are what we see fit, and what we want to do is be happy and reach eudaimonia. Interesting.
I would say my perspective's a little different. I mean, well, it's not really an area I've explored, but I think that happiness is sort of a privilege that animals that have already succeeded in their sort of journey have become. The goal is not to obtain happiness. I think the goal is to ensure that you have offspring, not only, but also ensure that your offspring live on to have further offspring. Because, I mean, you see it in the most successful species that are thriving in the ecosystem they live in, like, say, a dolphin or a dog, which are thriving in because they are privileged by us. They display signs of happiness, and they don't need to worry about surviving and just finding a mate like the most desperate animals do. So they then seek happiness. So I guess you could say that happiness would be the secondary goal once your future is already insured, but it's not really something I've explored very far.
I'm of the school of thought that happiness is not the goal of life. I think the goal of a good life should be to live, again, with virtue and reason and in line with the Logos. And I think that happiness comes as a byproduct of this, but I don't think that it should be your ultimate goal.
Yes. I think that I disagree with that, but I see what you mean. I think that's I have nothing else to add. I think that this was a very fruitful discussion. This happiness thing was a good thing to end on.
It was great meeting you all, Darwin, Socrates.
Can't think of another context where I would have gotten the chance to talk to you. I mean, I'm a big fan of your
autograph
work.
or what?
I'm good actually, dude. I don't have any tomes on me, so I don't know if you had paper.
I have a knife. Sketch my autograph in here, you know?
Okay, well, if you want to maybe autograph my toga real quick. I didn't wear a toga.
You wear regular clothes. We're trying to be racist now to those Greeks?
Yeah, maybe I'm
Or
appropriating
togas?
your ancient Grecian culture.
Aye.
But anyways, my name is Charles Darwin. I feel I've learned a lot today.
My name is Socrates.
And I'm Marcus Aurelius. Thank you for coming to our amazing podcast.
Yeah, our post-mortem podcast. And honestly, an interesting hellscape, which kind of resembles a room in Vienna. But
Yeah.
This
is a really bizarre situation we've been thrown into, but hopefully you can gather some sort of knowledge, some sort of, at least one nugget of information that will benefit you in your future. Pursue knowledge, pursue truth, and keep on thinking, everybody.
Hey.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Have a wonderful evening.